Chapter 17. The semi-Diosas gathered back at the platform with Diosa Luna. Looking around the group, Tia noticed how different the mood was compared to the first trial. When the trials had first started, there was a charged energy of competition. Now, everyone's cracks were starting to show. Excitement and eagerness were replaced with exhaustion and weariness as they all awaited the rankings. Dressed in her crisp white suit, Diosa Medica was summoned to assess Nia, who had been forced to sit in a chair. She checked Nia's heart and lungs with her golden stethoscope, a serious expression on her face. Poor Dio's tiara was a wreck, hovering behind Nia as he switched between nervously fidgeting with his tie and wringing his gloved hands. He looked distraught, or as distraught as someone in a mask could look anyway. Hard as rocks, Nia, who always seemed so indestructible, was sluggish, wincing every time she moved. Little red lightning burns streaked her arms and neck in feathery patterns. Diosa Medica finally cleared her, and when Nia stood up, encouraging cheers rippled through the crowd. "You okay?" Tio asked under his breath as Nia and Tiara took their places next to him and Diosa Quetzal. "It's going to take more than that to take me out," she said with a tired grin and a wink. Relieved, Tio smiled back, but it didn't last long. Diosa looked very pleased as she approached the stone slate. With no preamble, she said, "Sol has determined the rankings." This time, when the glyphs rearranged themselves, most of the movement was at the top, but Tio was focused on the bottom. He held his breath, waiting to see where Zio got placed. Tio exhaled a heavy breath. Zio was still in 8th, and while he certainly hadn't moved up in the rankings, at least he hadn't moved down. While it was relief, it was also confusing. Hadn't Zio been tagged first? Somehow Acela was beneath him again. When he looked over, he assumed that they would be fuming mad again, but to his surprise, Acela was uncharacteristically still. Instead of anger, fear hid in the lines of her face. Diosa Moore raised her hands and shook them over her head as she shouted triumphantly. She practically danced in place over her son's success, vehemently signing to him as Desi stood there beaming. Dios Tormentosa had to practically double over to speak soft, reassuring words to Otzi, who was on the verge of tears. Her eyes glistened and her chin dimpled, but she stayed strong, nodding whatever her dad said. When he stood upright, Tormentosa's expression was stormy, the thunder in his beard rumbling moodily. Even though Aristella had drastically moved down to 5th place, a bright smile lit up her face. She grabbed Aurelio's arm, shaking it fiercely. Tio realized she wasn't reacting to her own ranking, but celebrating that Aurelio was now first. Aristella had a new orange light behind her eyes, and Aurelio wobbled under her enthusiasm. As Verdad tugged at Aurelio's arm, pulling him away from an interview, Aurelio looked over his shoulder and caught Tio's eye. Aurelio smiled at him. It wasn't the forced smile that seemed to be part of Aurelio's uniform, but a genuine smile, the kind that bunched up his cheeks and crinkled his eyes. It stole the breath from Tio's lungs. "Tio!" His mother's gasp startled him. Dread dropped into his stomach. "What?" Frantically he searched for his glyph, scouring the bottom of the list. "Look!" Quetzal pointed at the slate. Not toward the bottom, but at the top. "4th?" Tio practically shouted, absolutely stunned. That couldn't be right, could it? "Wait, how?" "You and Nia were the only ones to tag 2 people, mijo," his mother said, beaming. "I believe that's the highest rank a Jake has ever received," Malasuerte said, his voice smooth and as silk, eyeing him curiously. "Holy shit," Tio breathed, unable to believe his eyes. "Couldn't be real. Me?" At his side, Zio stared up at the rankings, looking just as confused as Tio felt. Malasuerte wasn't the only one whose attention had turned to Tio. Other gold gods regarded him curiously. Diosumo smiled at him, her attention flicking between Tio and Desi, who signed quickly to his mom with emphatic facial expressions. Deose Guerrero narrowed their eyes at him suspiciously, but Dios Tierra, the kind-hearted man that he was, flashed Tio a discreet thumbs up. And then there was Dios Lumbre. Her scorching amber eyes stared at him so intensely, so calculating, that Tio was convinced his skin would blister. At her side, Aristella gave him an equally searing look. Maybe she was just pissed about him overtaking her in the ranks. "How in the heck am I in 2nd? Nia blurted out, genuinely perplexed. "I was unconscious for, the last 5 minutes. "Why am I still so low?" Otzi asked quietly. Dios Tormentoso stood dutifully next to his daughter with a hand on her shoulder. "While you were indeed rendered unconscious for the end of the trial, Nia," Diosa Luna said before anyone else could voice their objections, "you were never tagged out, and you did tag 2 of your competitors." Nia tipped her head back and forth, squinting one eye like she was trying to do the calculations in her head. "Otzi," Luna said, turning her attention to the reigned semidiosa, "the name of this trial was the Bloodless Battle. You were told to cause no physical harm to your competitors. You did not follow those instructions." Otzi shrank against her dad, who wrapped his burly arm around her shoulders. She nodded her understanding, but her lips quivered. "This challenge was designed to test your ability to work as a team. Tio and Aurelia were the only team to work together," Diosa Luna explained. Meanwhile, Estella abandoned their teammate as soon as the cornet sounded. Teo looked to Zio for confirmation. The younger boy had a smug look on his face, like he was glad to see Estella called out. It made Teo smile too. This isn't a score test like you take at school, the Yosaluna told them all in a cool tone. There isn't a grading rubric or numerical value assigned that determines your rank. Nia made a disgruntled sound. Teo knew her brain worked by finding literal solutions. She saw things in black and white and had a hard time understanding gray areas. Souls looking for the heart of their champion as well as their sacrifice, Yosaluna continued. That's how the Sunbearer is chosen. You will all do well to remember that. This is so annoying, Zio grumbled, shoving his hands into his pockets with a petulant scowl. As always, the three drifted to the back of the group as Luna led them to the temple. It's like impossible to figure out how the rankings work. Yeah, none of this is going the way I thought it would, Teo agreed with a shake of his head. I mean, I guess that's the point, right? Soul's seeing the surface stuff to see who's worthy. To decide who's worthy. Hey, at least you're not in last place, Nia pointed out, ruffling Zio's curly hair. Meanwhile, this guy might actually have a shot at being Sunbearer, she added, giving Teo a playful shove that sent him stumbling. Teo rolled his eyes dramatically, but it didn't feel impossible anymore. It was Nia who was supposed to overtake the other golds. He had no real belief that it could be him. There was no way Soul would see him as a valuable contender, but now he was sitting in 4th place. It was absolutely wild, and while he knew there was no way Soul would deem him worthy of being Sunbearer, well, what if they did? Jaden never won the Sunbearer trials before. If he did win, he'd be a huge upset. He thought of Paloma and how she'd barely faced her end. If he did win, maybe people would finally have to start taking Jade seriously. You know what? You're right, Zio said, his mood suddenly shifting as he grinned at Teo and Nia. I mean, I really thought I'd be dead right now, but I'm actually doing okay. A relieved laugh bucked in Teo's chest. They said one of us was going to end up being a sacrifice, but look at us now! That's the spirit, Nia sang. The three dissolved into laughter. It was the best he had felt since arriving at Soul Temple. Teo's hope was small and feather-like at first, but it smothered as he dreamed. Winning would mean getting back at everyone who thought golds were better than jades. He showed the Diosis how wrong they were for borrowing jades from the academy. Determination caught fire in his veins. The thought latched onto his brain and took hold. He could do it, not just for himself, but for every jade who'd ever been made to feel less than. It was more than making sure the bullies lost. Before, Teo wanted to protect and survive. Now he wanted to win. During dinner back on the boat, the golds were somber and in various stages of exhaustion. Marcelo frowned at their plate the whole time, their knees bouncing anxiously. Otzi never stood up, but Zochi volunteered to take her some food. Poor Nia had gone to bed early, the bolt of lightning she received from Otzi having done a number on her already exhausted body. She kept saying she needed extra rest in order to regain some brain cells. Teo didn't bother explaining that wasn't how brain cells worked. Everyone was worn out, feeling sorry for themselves, or both. Everyone except for Teo and Zio. Zio was in the best mood Teo had seen him in since the trials began. His smiles came easily and he even laughed at Teo's terrible jokes, and Teo was happy to ride the good vibes. 5 days of physically demanding trials, restless sleep, and learning how to use a whole new set of limbs was wearing Teo down. He had a constant, dull ache in his muscles and a low-level headache, but he was still in a great mood from today's success. He kept trying to catch Aurelio's eye, but his back was to Teo as Aristella spoke to him in hushed tones. Every time she caught him looking over, Aristella threw Teo a dirty look. It didn't seem like Teo would get the chance to congratulate him. Most people went to bed right after dinner. After taking a shower, Teo changed into a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt the Soul Priest had cut slits into for his wings. Teo paced back and forth in his cabin for several minutes. His skin crawled with pent-up energy, the punch-drunk kind from too little sleep and too much excitement. He was still riding high from the trial and just felt so good. It would be a waste to stay cooped up in his room all night. It had been a while since he got into any mischief and he was starting to feel itchy. So he came up with a plan. The wood floor was cold against Teo's bare feet as he crept down the hall, making sure to be especially quiet as he passed Zio's and Nia's rooms. He felt a little guilty, but didn't want to have to explain himself if he got caught. Lightly, he rapped his knuckles against the fire glyph painted on the door. His heartbeat fluttered in his pulse. Teo half expected Aurelio to be asleep already, but after a pause, he heard the padding of footsteps. The door opened to reveal Aurelio standing in a pair of tiny shorts and one of those gray oversized douchebag tanks from the huge sure holes that dropped down to his waist. This was the first time he'd ever seen Aurelio with his hair down. It cascaded to his shoulders, hiding the shaved sides in thick, shiny waves. Dressed down, soft and sleepy, this was a version of Aurelio that Teo knew he had never been meant to see. It sent a thrill down his spine, plunging into the pit of his stomach. For a second, Aurelio blinked at him, his bleary eyes widening with surprise while Teo gaped at him. "Damn, dude, I can see your nipples," Teo blurted out, taken aback by the sheer expanse of brown skin and muscle. Aurelio crossed his arms over his chest. Red bloomed in his cheeks. Tio grinned. Seriously, why even bother wearing a shirt if it doesn't cover anything? Aurelio scowled. I run hot, he said, voice gravelly with exhaustion. Do you sleep in those too? Tio asked, pointing at his golden armbands. Is it like a security blanket thing? Do you need something? Aurelio interrupted. He shook his head a little, the force making his dark hair glint and sending the delicate ends brushing against his shoulder. Tio shook his head, escorting his eyes back to Aurelio's face. What are you doing right now? Watching baking videos, Aurelio said, holding up his phone. Sure enough, a video of someone piping a cupcake with faint piano music played. Seriously? Tio chuckled. I thought you were messing with me the other day. They're relaxing, Aurelio said a bit defensively. Well, I've got other plans. Tio held up his backpack and wiggled his eyebrows. Want to come with me? Aurelio tipped his head to the side and cut Tio a suspicious look. What are you doing? Tio scoffed. Come on, what's the worst that could happen? Aurelio's gaze flicked toward his sister's rooms. That's not an answer. Oh my gods, Tio grumbled. Look, come on, come or don't come. I don't care. He turned to leave, but Aurelio stopped him. Wait, I'm coming. Tio beamed triumphantly. Great! But make yourself decent first, for soul's sake. I don't want to see your nipple staring at me all night. Aurelio ducked back into his room and tucked on a black hoodie. Where are you taking me? Aurelio asked as Tio led him out onto the deck. Keep your voice down, Tio told him in a sharp whisper, checking to make sure the coast was clear. We're on a mission. What mission? The other boy asked, quieter this time as he followed. To get Nia some candy and as a good get-well-soon present, Tio said as he waited for one of the deckhands to finish making her rounds. I ran out of stock, and it's always a surefire way to cheer her up. Wait, you mean sneak off the boat? Yes! The deckhand went inside and Tio sprinted for the dock. He got halfway across before he realized Aurelio hadn't followed him. He turned back to find the fire Sunbearer still standing on the boat. What are you waiting for? Tio whispered harshly. Aurelio glanced around. We're not supposed to leave the boat. Tio huffed. Do you always do what people tell you? I mean, yeah. Listen, I was supposed to be spending my time checking out all these cities on my own, but instead I got chosen to compete in the trials, so I'm taking back time that's owed to me, Tio insisted. Aurelio rolled his eyes but finally relented. It seemed impossible that even winning the Sunbearer trials could rival the triumph and brightness that exploded in Tio's chest. Equally surprised and delighted, he tugged on Aurelio's sleeve. Come on! Together they slipped off the dock and raced for freedom. Opal Oasis was surprisingly lively late at night. People spun out of sports bars and loud conversations filled the streets. With all the bustle, it would be easy for someone to spot Aurelio, the currently top-ranked competitor in the Sunbearer trials, and Tio, a boy with wings. Tio at least had the foresight to tug his wings inside his hoodie. When they got off the boat, he immediately pulled Aurelio's hood up over his head in an attempt to hide his face. Tio had no idea where they were going, but it was easy enough to follow the main road until they found a little bodega on the corner. The inside of the shop was full of metal shelves packed with items. There were towers of every flavor of chip imaginable and a section of toiletries, and the far wall was lined with coolers full of soda, energy drinks, and beer. There's a whole section dedicated to cleaning products and colorful piñatas, some bleached pale from the sun, hung from the ceiling. Tio made quick work of finding Nia's favorites and dumping them on the counter while Aurelio wandered the aisles, his fingers sliding over the tacks of colorful candy. After paying the gray-haired woman on the counter, Tio grabbed the bulging paper bag and led Aurelio to a bench in a well-lit park. What are they? Aurelio asked as he sifted through the pieces of candy Tio dumped out between them. What do you mean, what are they? Tio said with an uncertain laugh. It's candy! Aurelio hummed. He gave the array of candy an intense look of concentration that seemed better suited for a chessboard. Lucas, Paleta Payaso, Poporindo, Veramongo, Tio listed off. Do you seriously not know what candy is? Tio demanded. Aurelio gave a small, self-conscious shrug. I know what candy is, I just don't eat it, he said, pushing his hood back down. Tio balked. What? Why? We don't have it at the academy. At all? We're not supposed to, but people sneak it in, Aurelio specified. Like Nia. That's horrible. Pentose makes this sweet sometimes, and hot chocolate, he said, hesitantly picking up a packet of Limon 7. Aurelio poured it into his mouth. Immediately he coughed and spluttered, sending bits of powder flying from his mouth. That's horrible, he said, eyes watering. It's like seawater. Tio threw himself back, rubbing his arms around his stomach as he laughed. It tastes better on pickles. Aurelio's eyes were wide and his lip still curled in disgust, and the ridiculous alarmed expression threw Tio into another fit of laughter. Here, try this, Tio said, wiping the tears from his eyes as he handed Aurelio a blue cachetada. It's tamarind. How does this work? Aurelio asked as he carefully inspected the long oval shape. He held it up with both hands, closing one eye and peering at Tio through the kidney like it was a magnifying glass. There was an uneasy smile on Aurelio's face, so wide that it bordered on goofy. It was, Tio realized with a treacherous flutter, the kind of thing he would have done when they were kids. Tio huffed out a dramatic sigh and held out his open palm. You really are helpless. Aurelio hesitated for a second before handing it over. Tio laid the candy on his leg and peeled back the top layer of cellophane. It's easier if you have a table, he said, pulling the other plastic layer onto itself. Tio pressed his palm against his thigh to flatten the pliable candy and try not to swelter under Aurelio's gaze. Tio made slow, deliberate movements, twisting the stick between his fingers, holding the sweet again and again till the candy had become a narrow rectangle. Light no longer shone through it. Perfect fuel for becoming Sunbearer, Tio said as he handed it over. If candy is the deciding factor, Nia's probably got us beat, Aurelio said, jaw working as he chewed the sticky candy. Tio shook his head disapprovingly. Damn, I was just starting to think I might like attending the academy. Now I've changed my mind, he joked. Don't they have candy in your home city? I'm sure they do, but I don't leave campus much except when I get summoned on missions, Aurelio confessed. Don't you go home to visit your dad? Tio asked. My mom lets me and Aristella go home for her birthday, he said. That's about it. She thinks her time is better spent training instead of wasted at home. Wow. And Tio thought he spent too much time at school. He couldn't imagine what it'd be like living there 24/7 and only getting to leave once a year. It sounded like torture. What about your mom? Aurelio asked. Normally, Tio wouldn't take a diversion as an answer, but Aurelio looked so tired, he decided to let him get away with it. I get to see her a lot, Tio said. She gives out blessings in the temple during the week and spends longer visits with me on the weekends. She still leads all the holiday celebrations and even makes special trips to quinces and stuff, he explained. I guess that's a perk of being a Jade. Less responsibilities and more time to do what you want. Sounds nice, Aurelio said with a wry smile. But I've got Humac, who's my guardian when my mom's not around. He basically raised me, the poor guy, Tio said with a grin. I know. I remember, said Aurelio, voice low. I always liked him. Tio swallowed hard. He didn't know which part was harder to digest, the fact that Aurelio had memories of them, or that they were fond. You're lucky, Aurelio went on. Stella and I just had a rotating cast of pissed-off priests. Being her nanny was the least popular temple duty. Tio's grin slipped away. The more he talked about it, the more it seemed like Aurelio's life as a gold maybe wasn't as great as Tio thought it was. Was it the same for every gold semi-Dios? He knew Nia loved going home. Tio couldn't fathom a situation where Dios Tierra wouldn't be thrilled to see his daughter. In fact, Tio was pretty sure the golden mascot looked forward to being with his daughter more than even Nia looked forward to being with her dad, which is saying a lot. Aurelio's upbringing sounded painfully lonely. Tio had grown up with Humac away always by his side, looking after him, and the other Quetzan priests were like his family. Even the people of Quetzan itself had helped raise Tio. What was it like for Aurelio and Aristella to only have each other? Aurelio reached for one of the small discs of marzipan and tore open the wrapper. Immediately, the delicate candy crumbled to bits in his large hands. Tio lurched forward. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Aurelio froze, powdered marzipan sprinkling his lap. What? You're doing it all wrong! You gotta open it gently without breaking it. Tio picked up one and carefully undid the wrapper. Most of the marzipan remained intact except for its that crumpled away. See? He said, holding it up. You gotta do it like that. Aurelio furrowed his brow. Why? I don't know. Tio shrugged. You're just not supposed to. You're just supposed to. No one questions it. Just like biting into your cake on your birthday. Now Aurelio looked really confused. Why do you have to bite your cake? Just do it, Tio said, laughter shaking his words. Aurelio was so out of touch with anything fun. I really have a lot to teach you, he added with a disapproving shake of his head. Here, try another one. Aurelio took another marzipan and slowly started it under the rose wrapper, but he immediately turned into a crumbly mess. Tio snorted. If you become Sunbearer, you'll see all the other cities, Aurelio pointed out as he started on another marzipan. Each one throws a huge party. Tio knew the broad strokes of what being a Sunbearer entailed. At school, they mostly stressed the whole sacrificial ceremony part and didn't go too in-depth on what happened after, other than the Sunbearer being the one who delivered to each temple the elixir that was made from the sacrifice and fueled the sunstones. The pride of being fourth in the ranking still burned fiercely in his chest. Despite himself, Tio grinned. That'd be really cool, he said. Though I'm surprised you're even entertaining the idea of me winning. Everyone's got a chance, said Aurelio pointedly. I guess, but everyone expects it of you. Us shades don't have very exciting prospects back home, Tio said as he chewed the stick of his lollipop. Aurelio tipped his head curiously. What do Jade semi-Dioses usually do? Kinda depends on their parent, honestly. Mariachis and Bali's kids usually become performers. Medica's oldest daughter just became the head athletic trainer for the city soccer team, Tio explained. After I graduate, I'll probably just keep living in Quetzal Temple, helping Humac out with running the city and taking care of the birds, he confessed. That all sounds really nice, Aurelio said in a strange voice that Tio couldn't quite place. It's nothing compared to being a hero, Teal pointed out. You guys get to travel all over Reino del Sol, rescuing people and saving lives. Everyone knows who you are. They know about me, but they don't really know me, Aurelio said, his intense focus aimed at the marzipan in his hands. Being a hero means always being busy, always traveling to where I'm needed, he explained. I don't really get to settle down anywhere or get to know anyone who isn't on my team. At least you have options. Teal hadn't thought of it that way before. He figured the gold semidioses got to live lives of fame and luxury. He hadn't considered what it actually entailed. Aurelio actually already didn't have much of a family other than his sister. Was being a hero all it was cracked up to be? Was it worth being lonely and not having a life of his own? To be famous and beloved, but at a distance? There was only a year left until they graduated. Teal thought maybe this was his chance to be friends with Aurelio again, but the truth was, this is probably the last time they'd cross paths. After this, their lives would take them even further apart from each other. Suddenly, Teal's stomach wasn't in the mood for candy. He leaned over to toss a lollipop stick into a nearby trash bin, and his wings shut out abruptly, deciding they needed to stretch. Aurelio's eyes immediately snapped at him. He flooded Teal's face. Sorry. He leaned away from Aurelio and attempted to wrangle them against his back again, pulling his sweatshirt down. Feeling uncomfortable and defensive, he asked, Do they weird you out sometimes? Aurelio glanced around like he was trying to find what Teal was talking about. What? Teal crossed his arms tight over his chest. My wings. Aurelio's face screwed up in confusion. Of course not. Teal blinked. Oh. Why would you think that? Aurelio asked, toying with another marzipan. Teal shrugged as embarrassment caught up his neck. I don't know, you always look at them funny, he said, shifting awkwardly in his seat. Even when we were kids. When they were little, Teal used to always catch Aurelio staring at him, at his eyes from the corner of his eye. When Aurelio stopped talking to him, Teal assumed his wings were another reason Aurelio hadn't wanted to be his friend anymore. But now Aurelio gave him a small shake of his head, like he didn't understand what Teal was saying. I know they're kinda... Aurelio cut him off. I like your wings, he said, simple but earnest. Teal's heart gave a heavy thud. I just thought... He was suddenly flustered and struggling to string words into a complete sentence. You always avoid touching them. Aurelio shook his head, a small crease between his brows. No, I don't. Then why haven't you? Teal asked, frustration edging his voice. Everyone else constantly touched his wings without batting an eye. If Aurelio wasn't repulsed by them, why did he seem to go out of his way to avoid them? Aurelio lifted his shoulders in a small shrug. You never said I could. Teal stared at him, the tension quickly melting from his muscles as he sank back onto the bench. Completely caught off guard, Teal let out a small, oh. He was so used to people grabbing and touching his wings without consent, he hadn't even considered that Aurelio didn't touch them because Teal hadn't given him permission to. Teal cleared his throat, doing his best to put on a facade of nonchalance and composure. Well, you can touch them if you want, he added. He offered as casually as possible. Soft pink tinged Aurelio's cheeks. Are you sure? The way he asked it, so uncertain, made Teal laugh. Yeah, dude, don't make it weird. He scooted forward on the bench so he could turn around. Just be careful, they've got a mind of their own sometimes, he warned. Apparently, this time his wings wanted to behave, because they laid neatly against his back, waiting. Why is there a sun? Why are we doing a time skip here? I'm sorry, I have to say this. There's a sun here. There's a time skip, but we are just skipping the moment where Aurelio is touching his wings. I don't understand. Anyway. The nervous energy of anticipation would have made Teal laugh if he wasn't having such a hard time dealing with how fast his heartbeat was throbbing in his veins. After a long pause, Aurelio's fingers brushed lightly against the small covert feathers on the top of his wings. They shuddered in response, and Teal let out an awkward laugh. Sorry, that tickles, he said, goosebumps running down his arms. Aurelio's touch was surprisingly gentle and always, always so warm. Aurelio's fingers followed the path of his fingers, down to the long primaries that ended at the tip of his wings. I didn't think they'd be so soft, Aurelio said quietly. Teal tried to recover his shiver with a laugh. Were you expecting scales? He asked, turning to look at Aurelio over his shoulder. Aurelio gave him a withering look, but the corners of his lips pulled into a smile, the kind that warmed his eyes and softened his always so serious expression. It was so distracting that Teal caught himself staring. Every nerve in his body danced and tingled. Aurelio's smile shifted to an expression so soft it made Teal hold his breath. I could have sworn I made it clear you were supposed to stay on the boat. Oh no. Sorry. Teal and Aurelio jumped, immediately springing apart. Luna stood before them, a severe expression on her face. Aristella stood at Luna's side with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glared at Teal, who was nothing new to him, but Aurelio's shoulders hunched guiltily. Luna, Teal said, holding his arms out in greeting. We were just... He glanced at Aurelio's direction, but the other boy was entirely useless. The color having drained from his face, he stared, terrified, at the diosa. Teal's mind raced to come up with some kind of excuse, but he had nothing. This was possibly the first time he couldn't talk himself out of trouble. Do you want some candy? He asked with a guilty smile. Tio, Aurelia, and Aristella followed behind Luna as they made their walk of shame back to the dock. What are you doing here? Aurelia asked his sister, trying to be quiet. Luna caught me sneaking out to look for you, she hissed back. Tio rolled his eyes. Typical. Back to your rooms, Luna said sternly when they were back on the boat. All three of you. If I catch you breaking the rules again, there will be dire consequences. Side by side, Tio and Aurelio boarded the boat. Aristella jerked her head in the direction of the bedrooms. Come on, Aurelio. For a moment, Aurelio didn't move and Tio thought he might stay, but it was short-lived. Okay, I'm coming. When Aristella didn't move, Aurelio exhaled a breath. He turned to Tio. Here. Aurelio held out his closed fist, and Tio offered his upturned hand. Very carefully, Aurelio placed a perfectly unwrapped marzipan in his palm. Small laugh bucked in Tio's chest. See you tomorrow, Aurelio murmured. See you. With that, Aurelio followed his sister inside, leaving Tio alone with the marzipan and an ache in his chest. He hadn't noticed how Aurelio's body heat had been keeping him warm until it was gone. Chapter 18. As punishment for his escapades the previous night, Tio wasn't allowed to go to the soccer match that Dios Guerrero had arranged for them to attend. Aurelio, as noble and principled as he was, said he should get the same punishment, but Tio argued it had been his idea, that he quite literally dragged Aurelio along with him. Luna readily accepted that as the truth, which probably should have offended him. Either way, it didn't make sense for both of them to miss out. When the group left, Tio went into the common area and talked some of the priests into playing dominoes with them as the soccer match played on the television. As if to rub it in, cameras kept panning to where the other 9 competitors had their own box seats, surrounded by a lavish spread of food and drinks. After he lost 2 rounds of dominoes in a row, the priest took pity on him and brought up a tray of pan dulce handmade by the diosa herself. Eventually everyone came back, loaded down with souvenirs. Nia gave him her stuffed jaguar, the mascot of the Opal Oasis team, and Zio gave him his yellow and red spotted scarf. When Nia raved about how fun it had been, Zio at least looked guilty for having a good time without him. For their trip to Guerrero Temple, they were given sleeveless black tunics with matching pants adorned with gold fasteners down the outer stitching. There was also a red cape that they wore, knotted on the left shoulder and draped across the right with their parents' glyphs embroidered onto it. Nia had to help Tio get into his because his wings kept getting in the way. Finally, they disembarked, with Estella leading the way. After being cooped up all day, Tio was happy to get off the boat, but Guerrero Temple felt less than welcoming. It might have had something to do with the 2 ginormous gold jaguar statues sitting atop each wing of the massive building. Their empty, staring eyes made Tio shiver. He didn't like cats, especially big ones, and the ominous statues gave him the heebie-jeebies like any second they'd hop down and swallow him in one gulp. The courtyard of the temple housed a small grove of jungle trees, complete with heavy branches and hanging vines surrounding a pond. A larger-than-life golden statue of Dios Guerrero stood on the edge of the water with a black statue of a jaguar lying across their feet. Tio thought it was another statue until they approached. It lifted its large square head, amber eyes practically glowing against its melanated fur. It stared up and stalked toward the group. Before Tio could do little more than yelp and latch onto Nia's arm, the jaguar latched itself onto Ocello, knocking them off their feet. A terrified shout ripped through Tio's throat as the jaguar licked Ocello's face. Tio looked up, absolutely baffled, as 3 other jaguars with normal coloring emerged from the trees and piled onto the war Semediose. Ocello laughed and greeted their massive friends, wrestling and pushing them affectionately as they rubbed their large heads against Ocello in welcome. You good? Nia asked with an amused grin. Tio realized he was still clinging to Nia's arm for dear life. He quickly let go of her, wiped his sweaty palms on his thighs. Yes? He scowled. Zio at least had the decency to hide his chuckles behind his hand. Something tugged Tio's wing. He looked back to find a jaguar cub pawing at him, snuffling curiously at his feathers. Tio jumped onto Nia, practically climbing under her back. Help! But Nia was too busy laughing to do anything while the cub sat back on its haunches, swatting playfully. Stella walked over and scooped the cub up into their arms. That's my good girl, they said, grinning as they walked back to the front of the group. The cub placed her massive paws on either side of their head, long tongue grooming their buzzed hair. Stella's dyed jaguar rosette patterns matched the fur on the cubs almost perfectly. Tio turned to his friends, his face red. Thanks a lot, you two, he snapped while Nia continued to cackle. Nia was doubled over, cracking up, his arms wrapped around his stomach. I'm gonna pee. Jesus Christ. To worsen the humiliation, he caught Aurelio watching him with amusement. Tio quickly turned away to hide his ever-reddening cheeks. The black jaguar walked next to Ocello, and Luna and the group made their way to the courtyard. The rest of the cats stayed behind, but Tio swore they were staring at him. Instead of greeting them in the dining hall like the others, Dios Guerrero's massive form stood waiting for them at the entrance of the temple. Welcome, heroes! They called, sharp teeth flashing as they craned ear to ear. They waved everyone inside, giving friendly hellos before falling in a step next to Ocello, their large arm draped across their child's shoulders. The dining hall was small but cozy. The table was already piled high with nearly every kind of meat imaginable, but heavy on juicy, rare steaks. The priests in red were talkative, and not once did Tio's glass go empty. Diose Guerrero shared the head of the table with Lucella. The black jaguar made itself comfortable on an overstuffed pillow, chewing on hunks of meat and bones that Guerrero shared from their own plates. The jaguar cub remained in Lucella's lap, being hand-fed and sucking at Lucella's fingers in between. Diose Guerrero was a lot different than how Tio pictured. He figured the god would be surly and intimidating, like Ocello, but Guerrero was the complete opposite. They were loud and friendly with an easy, albeit sharp-toothed smile. Guerrero liked to make jokes and then probably cracked himself up, sending their booming laughter echoing across the room. Stranger still was to see Ocello in their natural habitat, smiling and laughing right along. By the time they returned to the boat, everyone was stuffed. The other goats piled onto the couches in the common room, nursing their food comas and slipping endlessly through channels on the TV. Tio, Zio, and Nia sequestered themselves in some armchairs in the corner, watching clips of previous trials Diose Guerrero had hosted. When it came down to it, they all involved in some sort of head-to-head competition. One year, competitors were paired off in a ring and forced to battle one another until someone got pushed out of bounds, while another involved a variation of capture the flag. As the night went on, Zio got quieter and quieter. Neo didn't seem to notice, but Tio could literally watch the tension creeping into his shoulders. They were the last ones left in the common room, and when Neo nodded off and started to snore, Tio decided it was time for bed. "Do we have to?" Zio asked in a small voice. He kept anxiously twisting his bracelet around his wrist. "It's pretty late. You should get some sleep so you're well rested for tomorrow." "I guess." Zio trailed off, staring at the door that led outside. "You okay?" Tio asked. Suddenly, he was worried that Zio might be a flight risk. He didn't know what happened to competitors who tried to run away during the trials. He was too scared to look it up. Zio was silent for a moment, but then he turned back to Tio and forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." Tio knew he was lying. Maybe that was obvious, because Zio had hastened to add, "It's just nice to have company, I guess. Back home I share my room with 3 of my siblings. It's kind of weird and quiet by myself." "You can stay with me," Tio offered, feeling bad for the kid. He had no idea what it was like sharing a room since he was the only child of Quetzal. Well, the only living one, but he could imagine having the change would be jarring. "I'm sure one of the soul priests could bring in a spare bed." But Zio quickly shook his head. "No, that's all right," he said, using that same forced smile on him again. "I've got some stuff I need to do before bed anyway." When Tio gave him a questioning look, he added, "Just want to go over my notes one more time." "I can keep you company if you want." No, it's okay, really," Tio said hurriedly. Tio sucked his lips between his teeth. He didn't like the idea of Zio being alone, but he also didn't want to treat him like he was a child. "All right, well, I'm across the hall if you change your mind. Okay?" Zio nodded. Tio reached over and gave Nia a shove. She was a heavy sleeper, and if he weren't a little rough with her, she stayed dead to the world. A short start riled Nia's nose, and she sat bolt upright. "What happened?" she asked groggily, looking around. "Time to go to bed, Sleeping Beauty," Tio teased as Zio picked up his binder of cards. Nia yawned and stretched. "Oh, good. I was starting to get a little tired." Tio tossed and turned the entire night. His body was full of restless energy. Unlike the night before the other trials, this time he felt a buzz of excitement instead of the usual dread. He still couldn't believe that he'd come in 4th. Everyone had a chance, Aurelia had said so himself, but did he really believe it? At breakfast the next morning, Tio's knees bounced uncontrollably under the table, and his gaze kept slipping to Aurelio. When Aurelio glanced back, he set a fire low in Tio's stomach that continued to smolder as Luna arrived to tell them where they were headed next. "For the 4th trial, we will be traveling to Laberinto," she announced. Tio sat there in shock while confusion passed around the table. "Laberinto?" Xochitl repeated, like she hadn't heard of it before. Ozzy shrugged, just as lost. "Laberinto is a jade city," Tio said, louder than he meant to. He looked at Luna, waiting for some kind of explanation, but she only nodded. "That is correct." Tio didn't know whether to laugh or cheer or do something else entirely. "Holy crap," came Zio's small, odd city. "Why are we going to a jade city?" Aristella demanded, spitting the word like it left a bad taste on her tongue. "Because Diosa Opsion is hosting the 4th trial," Luna said, choosing to ignore Aristella's attitude. "There's never been a trailhead in a jade city before," Aurelio said slowly, though not unkindly. "Yes, and we've never had 2 jade competitors either," Luna pointed out, casting a quick glance at Tio and Zio. Tio could have sworn she was holding back a smile. "I think this is a trial full of unprecedented and unexpected." "I can't believe it," Tio said, half delirious as he, Zio, and Neo went to the aft deck to talk over what they just learned. "A jade city!" he repeated, pushing his hand through his hair. "I don't know what to make of it," Nia confessed as she sank onto the couch. "Me neither. It means something," he insisted. "I just don't know what." Were the other gods finally seeing that Jades were entirely useless? If they were being chosen by Soul to compete, and a Jade god was even hosting one of the trials, did that mean maybe, finally, Jades were going to get a chance? It was an opportunity, one that Teal didn't want to waste. If he could pull this off, he would have the chance to change things for Jades on a monumental level. While Teal chuckled his internal crisis, Nia started asking more practical questions. What's Opción de Diosa anyway? There's so many Jade dioses, it's hard to keep track, she said before hastily adding, no offense. Problem-solving, ingenuity, and choices, Zio supplied with his encyclopedic knowledge. His trading card binder had been searched and cast aside. There was no historical information that would help them this time around. Sounds hard, Nia said with a look of concern. Just can't believe it's a Jade City, Teal repeated for about the 10th time as he paced. Maybe it'll be like a puzzle? Zio guessed. Nia scoffed. If the fourth trial is a damn board game, I want my money back. They bounced around ideas as Morea steered them east. Labyrinto is a coastal city, nearly on the opposite side of the equator from Quetzalcoatl. As they made their final approach, the river grew wide until they entered a channel from the freshwater, where the freshwater met the ocean and Labyrinto came into view. Tio, Zio, and Neo went onto the deck for a better look. It was a small cliffside city perched on a peninsula and overlooking the Eastern Ocean. The sound of crashing waves and singing gulls traveled in the wind. The air smelled briny, like salt water. While the Western Ocean, which Quetzalcoatl bordered, was calm and bright blue with sandy beaches, the shores of the base of Labyrinto were the complete opposite. Whitecaps lapped against the sides of the boat, while dark, frothy waves crashed against the rocky shore, sending streamers of seaweed rolling in the surf. Far above, at the top of the cliffs, rested Labyrinto. It was too congested to have an arena within city limits, so one had been constructed on a bit of land near the sea. The wind whipped through the air, carrying with it the chill cheers of the waiting crowd. It seemed oddly louder than usual, but Tio thought little of it. He was too busy getting stuck in his own head. It was down to the wire now. He had 2 more trials left to succeed. He had to be focused and not let himself get distracted, which is why when they walked into the arena and thunderous cheers erupted, he barely noticed. Holy shit! Nia stopped abruptly, causing Tio to collide into her very solid back. Give a guy some warning, Nia! Look! You nearly broke my nose on your— Tio! Nia grabbed him by the shoulders and spun him toward the stands. Look! At first, Tio didn't understand what he was supposed to be looking at. The tiered seating was packed full of people sitting shoulder to shoulder. They waved pennants and flags in the air, just like every other trial, but then he realized they weren't the white flags of the golds, or even Soul. They were bright blue-green. Jade. Tio's breath caught in his throat. And not just any jade flags. They all bore the spread-winged Quetzal, his mother's glyph. Fans held handmade signs with his name and posters, this terrible picture from that very first day. There were even hand-painted posters of Quetzals. Hero of the Jades, one sign read. Clips of Tio from the previous trials flashed across the giant jumbotron. Tio kneeling for the mother at Libraje, she leaned over him. Tio dodging attacks in the trees. Tio flying from Tierra's mountain with his new wings. They didn't even show the part where he was struck by lightning out of the sky. The jumbotron switched to a live feed, focused on his stunned, open-mouthed face. The crowd erupted in screams, shouts, and whistles. They thundered so loudly, Tio could feel it reverberate deep in his chest. Garbled words slowly filled the air until it became one resounding chant. Pajarito! Pajarito! I think. I don't know. He couldn't believe it. They're here for you! Nia practically screamed in his ear. Zio turned to look up at Tio, eyebrows lifted and lips parted like he couldn't believe it either. Spontaneous laugh jumped in Tio's throat. His eyes stung and his chest was so tight he could barely breathe. He pressed his palms into his cheeks and shook his head. How is this possible? His stomach tumbled as he went to his mom. This is amazing, Tio, she said, squeezing him tight. You're their hero. Hero. Tio turned, seeking out Aurelia. When he found him, Aurelia was already watching, an open, unabashed smile gracing his features. Tio smiled back so big it made his face ache. He didn't even care that Aristella was seething next to him. She didn't matter. Tio, a lowly jade from a tiny, forgotten city, was standing in the ranks of the best young heroes in all of Reino del Sol. People were calling to him. They wanted him to win. And Tio was not going to let them down. For the fourth trial, a temple loomed in the center of the arena. Only it was less a temple and more the ruins of one. It was covered in glistening ferns and slick moss. Caved-in sections roof yawned open, pitch black and draped with vines. The stone steps going up the center of the temple were split and broken by thick roots. It was a strange sight. Something about it was unsettling and made him move closer to Nia's side. Tio had never heard of a temple in such a state of decay. Even the poorest of jade temples were so lovely tended to by their people. It was like getting a glimpse of a desolate future or a long ago past. For the fourth trial, competitors must collect stones from caches hidden from within this temple, Dios Luna instructed and signed. There are 4 different kinds of stones, each of which are worth a different number of points. Obsidian stones are worth 10 points, jade stones are worth 25 points, and gold stones are worth 100 points. Lastly, there is one replica of the soul stone hidden within the temple. It is worth 500 points. Marina let out a low whistle. It sounded simple enough, but even Tio could spot that this would be a lot more complicated than the past trials. Trying to find stones hidden in an unfamiliar temple would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Lower value stones are easier to find and can be found in higher quantities, while gold stones will be fewer and more difficult to locate. Luna continued. Competitors have 1 hour to collect as many points as possible. Soul Priest stepped forward and handed out black drawstring backpacks and what looked like fancy sportswear watches. Tio murmured his thanks as he took his. When he fit the watch around his wrist, the face lit up with acid green numbers. 60 minutes. You must deposit your stones at the altar at the top of the temple before the hour is up, Luna said, gesturing toward the temple. Tio craned his neck to squint up at it. He couldn't quite see the top, but something shiny caught the sunlight. You can deposit your stones at any time, but you may only do so once. Once you've deposited your stones, your score is locked in for the trial. Luna's midnight black eye swept down the line of semidioses. You can use whatever means you are at your disposal to collect stones or interfere with other players, he said. Luna smiled like she knew something they didn't. They were ushered to the edge of the bridge to all start at once. Since his wings were too cumbersome to allow him to carry his backpack on his back, Tio wore it on his chest to avoid the hassle. Some of the Golds had a similar idea. If nothing else, it'd be easier to put stones into and keep them safe. I've got a bad feeling about this one, Zio said, his eyes locked on the temple. Hey, no negative thoughts, Neo ordered as she helped him put it on his drawstring backpack, securing in place. Only positive vibes here. Right, Tio? Right, Tio agreed blindly. He was distracted by Aurelio and Aristella, who stood nearby, stretching and probably talking about their strategies as they waited the start of the trial. We'll be able to stick together this time, Nia reassured him. We'll gather as many stones as possible and then split them up. We'll give him extra to Zio since he's so low in the rankings. But anything those fools are going to be battling out for the higher point stones. Just stick to the jade and obsidian ones. Nia's voice faded into a low thrum as Tio edged closer to Aurelio and nudged the back of his knee with the toe of his shoe. Aurelio's knee buckled. When he whipped around, Tio smirked. Ready to get knocked out of first place, golden boy? Aristella's attention snapped at Tio, her face pinching with restrained anger. But Aurelio's expression softened to an amused grin. You think you can get more points than me, bird brain? Oh, I know I can. A sparking eye behind Aurelio's eyes. Prove it. Something burned deep in Tio's chest. It didn't even care when Aristella grabbed her brother's arm and turned him away. When Tio turned back to his friends, Nia immediately smacked his arm, which felt more like a punch coming from the burly semidiosa. Ouch! Ew, Tio! Nia snapped accusingly. What? He said through guilty chuckles. Little friendly competition never hurt anyone. While Nia gagged, Zio's eyes shifted curiously between Aurelio's back and Tio. Semidiosis, on my mark, Luna's amplified voice boomed. Mariachi's cornet sounded at the same time Tio's watch buzzed on his wrist. Everyone ran across the bridge, Aurelio and Aristella leading the pack. Tio and Nia slowed to keep pace with Zio. The closer they got to the temple, the less confident Tio felt. The cheers from the stands were crushing this time, ringing in his ears. The first cache they came upon was in the courtyard. The ground was covered in dense overgrowth, threatening to snag Tio's feet if he stepped wrong. Sections of the outer temple walls had streaks of ash peeking out between blankets of greenery. In the center of the courtyard stood a humanoid statue made of cracked and weathered stone. Time had worn away any facial features there once had been, leaving only a jagged gash. Everyone sprinted toward the statue. Tio could see the gold stone, by the size of his fist, rest atop its head. Immediately the golds up ahead raced for it. That's creepy, Tio said as they slowed to a stop. Blech, Nia agreed, twinkling her nose. We should... Tio looked at Zio, but he was no longer standing between them. He'd come to a stop a few yards back. Frozen in place, he stared up at the statue with wide eyes, the color draining from his face. Tio quickly retreated back to his side. Hey, it's all right, he said, gently bumping his shoulder into Zio's. We'll look out for each other. The kid was clearly terrified, and Tio couldn't blame him. We're sticking together this time, Nia reminded him. Let's get some rocks and get this over with. The sooner the better, Tio agreed. Zio nodded, a short jerky movement, his eyes still stuck on the statue. By the time they reached the statue, Aurelio had swiped the gold stone, and Aristella had grabbed one of the 3, slightly smaller jade stones in the statue's upturned hands. Estella got the second, and Xochi the third. The others had completely bypassed the statue and run into the temple. No one even touched the obsidians, Tio said as they approached the deserted statue. A small pile of polished obsidian stones about the size of chicken heads sat at the statue's feet. Did they not see them? They probably think they're too good for them, Nia growled. Seriously? Seriously. That seems like a bad strategy, Tio mused as he picked up 2. Stones were cool against his fingers as he slipped them into his bag. Mostly were going to want the gold stones, Nia said as she dumped the remaining 8 into Zio's backpack. Don't you need some? Zio asked, giving Nia a surprised look. Nia waved him off. We'll find more. Besides, I'm doing fine in the rankings. Not to brag or anything, she added with a wink. But something wasn't sitting right with Tio. This seems too easy, doesn't it? He said, looking around the now abandoned courtyard. Just stones waiting out in the open. Tio, Nia snapped, cutting her hand across her body in the slash throat motion. Just accept the nice gifts from the Diosis and let's move on. Don't jinx it. No offense, she added to Zio. He shrugged his small shoulders. None taken. Tio tried to push the nagging feeling to the back of his mind. Right now, he needed to focus on getting through this trial, especially if he was going to beat Aurelio. Let's go before all the gold stones get taken, Tio said. He led the way through the courtyard where the crooked stone steps led up to the top of the temple. 2 large, dark archways stood on either side of every couple flights. Left, right, or up? Tio asked. Aurelio, Aristella, and Acello went to the left, Nia said. I saw Xochi, Marino, Desi, and Atsu go right, Zio added, clutching the straps of his backpack. Then let's go up, Tio said, not waiting for confirmation as they took the uneven steps 2 at a time. Better we find an untouched cache first and not just their leftovers. When the path split in 2, Tia immediately went for the left. Let's go! With one last glint of daylight, they crossed the arch and were plunged into darkness. Immediately, the noise of the cheering crowd cut off. The sudden silence sent Tio's heart lurching in his chest. All three skidded to a stop on the slick floors. Do you guys hear that too? Zio asked, experimentally rubbing his ear. Yeah, Tio said, taking in their surroundings. Unlike the open-air floors of Quetzal's temple, these dimly lit halls were cramped and split off in several different directions. Pitted stone floors were flanked by walls covered in faded carvings and dark mold. The echoes of water dripping and wind slipping through empty halls were the only sounds. How the hell are we supposed to navigate this place? Tio said. Without Winters or a guide, it'd be impossible to orient themselves. Torches lining the walls were the only source of light. Well, we know going up will get us to the finish point, Nia offered as she sifted green, spongy growth on the wall. Tio rolled his eyes. Yeah, no shit. And don't lick that. She shot him a scowl. Wasn't going to. I guess we should pick a direction and hope for the best, Zio cut in with a doubtful look. Nia threw her hands up in an exaggerated shrug. I guess so. We haven't had a real plan for any of the other trials, so why start now? Tio grumbled. Let's try this way, Zio said, pointing to a hallway lined with arched doorways. As they ran past, it was so dark that Tio couldn't even see what was on the other side. Dios, how big is this place? Tio wondered as they jogged down the corridor. It seemed to stretch on forever ahead of them. It was impossible to see where, or if, it ended. Can't be any bigger than the arena, right? Nia said, but even she looked doubtful. Let's try this one, Zio said, veering off to jog through one of the shadowed arches. Once they passed through, they found themselves in another identical hallway. Uneasiness churned in Tio's stomach. A low, creeping feeling worked up the back of his neck as he and Neo followed Zio through another doorway, and into another identical hall. Is this the same hallway? Nia asked, stopping to spin in a circle. I don't think so, Zio said, not sounding too concerned. I have no idea, Tio admitted, squinting into the dark. I can barely see anything. Hang on. Tio turned to see Nia, with a twinkling of metal, transforming her bangles into a shiny axe. She lifted it above her head before swinging it down at the floor. The blade struck the stone, leaving a splintered crack. There, Nia said, leaning the axe against her shoulder like a bat. She proudly gestured to the circle of crumbled stone. Now we can tell if it's the same hall. Ready to go, Zio led the way through a different doorway. This way! Tio followed, and, once again, they were spit into a hallway, and there was a large gash in the stone Nia had left. Tio groaned. This is definitely the same hallway. He barely got the words out before Nia shoved his arm, sending him stumbling forward. You jinxed us! She barked. Tio caught himself before he could run to the slimy wall. No, I didn't! You said this seems too easy! Nia mimicked him in a ridiculously deep voice. Tell him, Zio! I don't sound like that, Tio said, shoving her back, which of course did nothing. Annoyance itched under his skin. It's not my fault we wound up in this stupid hallway. Zio stood between them, eyes bouncing back and forth as they bickered. Well, it's certainly not my fault, Nia shot back. Tio let out a groan so frustrated that it almost became a squawk. We need to focus! We've only hit one cache and we have no idea how many there are in total. Which way should we try next? This way, Zio said. Tio and Nia chased after him as he took off through another doorway. Over and over again, they found themselves in the same hall. Wait, Tio said before Zio could run through another doorway. Zio and Nia both skidded to a stop. This isn't working, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. The damp, trapped air felt thick in his lungs. This doesn't make any sense, Nia shouted, her voice echoing as she stomped her foot. These stupid doorways aren't working! The bangles against her wrists melted and grew into a large metal club in her hands. Nia, Tio warned, but it was too late. Sorry. Holding it like a bat and with a fierce look of determination, she swung the axe into the wall. The hit cracked a stone, echoing through the hall against the walls. The ground beneath Teal's feet shook violently. Teal grabbed Zio's hood and dragged him back. Luckily, the only damage Nia caused was a jagged hole in the wall. There, Nia smiled happily. If those doorways don't work, then we'll use a new one. The club turned back into bangles. Nia pushed some of the loose rocks to widen the gap. The ancient stone didn't put up much of a fight. Nia, Teal snapped, could have caused the floor to collapse. She scoffed. Don't be so dramatic. I barely put any force behind it. That was barely? Zio asked, staring up at Nia with wide eyes. Nia preened in response. Let's try not to cause any cave-ins while we're in here, Tio said, rubbing his temples. He checked his watch to see that more than 5 minutes had already passed. Let's go. Nia squeezed her way through the hole first, and Tio waited for Zio to go next before following. As he stumbled through, he heard Nia say, Uh-oh. Now what? There wasn't another hallway on the other side of the hall. Instead, it opened up into a small room. Other than some moss and the questionable smell of mildew, it was empty. On the far wall stood a single door made of dark, water-stained wood. Well, it's no worse, Tio said as he hesitantly stepped closer to the door. It smells bad in here, Tio said, covering his nose with his sleeve. Getting bad vibes from that door, Tio, Neo added, her voice tight. Oh, come on, Nia, since when are you afraid of... Tio turned around to face his friend. Nia's brow was bunched as she stared at the door, and Zia's face was scrunched in distaste. But what made him pause was a hole in the wall. Rather, lack thereof. Tio's shoulders slumped and his stomach dropped to the stone floor. Okay, maybe it is worse. He pointed at the blank wall behind them, which showed no sign of Nia's early destruction and, more important, no exit. What the shit? Nia gasped, turning her hands over the slick stone. Should I make another hole? No! Got the feeling trying to take shortcuts is what got us in here, Tio said, trying to keep his voice even. He didn't want to admit it, but panic was trying to claw its way up his throat. He wasn't used to being stuck in small places and didn't like the feeling of being encased in stone one bit. Tio's wings kept readjusting themselves, and it took all his concentration to keep them under control. Maybe someone should try the door? Tio offered. He was right, of course, and the quicker they got out of there, the better. Tio needed fresh air and sky. Nia rolled her shoulders back and lifted her chin. Well, let's give it a try. She marched up to the door and grabbed the handle. By some miracle, it groaned open. Relief was like a splash of cool water on Tio's face. Nia turned back to them with a smile. It worked! No sooner had the words left her lips than Tio saw something move on the other side. Before Tio could do anything more than let out a strangled shout, a massive stone hand shoved Nia. Knocked onto her back, Nia skidded across the floor to Tio's and Zio's feet before the door slammed shut. Son of a... Neo? Nia? Tio dropped down next to her as she gasped for breath. Are you alright? The fuck was that? She croaked, rubbing her chest and coughing. Looked like a hand, Zio said, with keen curiosity as he squinted at the now closed door. Tio helped her onto her feet. I think we need to stop and think. But Nia was already storming back to the door. I've got this, don't worry, she said as the metal club materialized in her hand again. I don't think... Too late. Nia threw open the door again, ready to swing, but the stone hand appeared once more. This time, it flipped the club right out of Nia's grip. Tio grabbed Zio and used his wings to jump high enough to avoid it as it skidded across the floor right behind them. Before Nia could react, the hand shoved her again and she went flying. Her back slammed into the wall before she ended up in a heap on the floor along with her bat. Anyone less than a demigod would have had their skull cracked open by now. I don't think that's working, Zio observed calmly as Tio helped her stagger to her feet yet again. But Nia wasn't listening. She held her hand out and the club flew back into her grip like a magnet. This time, the bangles from her ankles joined to morph into a large hammer. We're getting through that door, she shouted, stalking forward with a grime streaked across her bare thighs and muscular arms. This time, Nia was faster. When the door opened, she was ready to struck the stone hand with her hammer, but simply caught the weapon in its palm and squeezed. The mangled hunk of metal dropped uselessly to the floor. You! Before Nia could get out her insult, the hand picked her up and chucked her at Tio and Zio. He dove out of the way as she collided into the wall with a crack. This time, when she slid to the floor, her body left a cobweb of cracks in the stone wall. For soul's sake, Nia, Tio said, racing back to her side as the door slammed shut again. Would you stop? It's not working. When he got her into a sitting position, chunks of her hair had escaped her braids, sticking out at odd angles. Nia spat, her golden blood splattering on the ground and shining on her lip. When she looked up, anger glinted in her bronze eyes. Rude, asshole! She roared. I don't think it cares, Zio mused. Something in Tio's mind clicked. I've got an idea, he said, turning back to the door. If the temple threw us in this room because it didn't like that we crashed through the wall... We? Nia pressed. Because you crashed through the wall, Tio corrected, doing his best not to sound annoyed. Maybe we were the rude ones. I don't get it, Zio said. Maybe we're playing the game wrong, Tio said as he slowly approached the door. Every fiber in his being was screaming at him to stay away, but his wings flung themselves out, knocking him off balance, and they were going to take flight. There was nowhere to run to. Tio stopped in front of the door. His heart hammered in his veins as he clenched his hands into fists, trying to steady himself. He sucked in a breath and said a silent prayer to soul before knocking the door. The echoes faded without anything happening. Swallowing hard, Tio cleared his dry throat. "May we go through?" he asked. The door groaned open and Tio immediately dropped to the floor, flinging up his wings to cover his head, but no stone hand threw him across the room. "Well, shit," Nia said through a laugh. Tio peeked between the feathers of his wings. The door stood wide open and the hand was nowhere in sight. Did it work?" Tio asked, hardly believing it himself. "Looks like it." Nia jerked him to his feet. "Who knew you'd be the brains to my brawn?" she said, thumping him so hard in the back it knocked the wind from his lungs. "Thanks," Tio coughed. "How'd you know to do that?" Zio asked, frowning up at Tio. "I didn't," he admitted with a shrug. Zio didn't seem satisfied with that answer, but there wasn't time to discuss it further. "Onward and upward," Nia announced. She had nearly been made into human pulp mere moments ago. Tio led the way through the door. On the other side was another, much bigger room. It was narrow but quite long, with flickering torches lining the walls and illuminating the next cache. "Finally," Tio sighed in relief. 3 stone pedestals sat equidistant from each other. The closest held 10 obsidian stones. Past that were the 4 jades. And at the very back of the room a goldstone glimmered on its own. All the stones present meant no one else had found the cache yet. We should take all of them, right?" Tio asked, looking at Nia and Zio for a morality check. "Hell yeah! Screw those other guys!" Nia agreed with a snort. Zio stepped forward, but Tio grabbed him by the back of his jacket. "Wait! What?" Zio asked, giving him a confused look. "There must be a catch, right?" Tio reasoned. "I mean, we just got stuck in a never-ending hallway and Nia nearly got creamed." "But did I die?" she interjected. Tio decided to ignore her. "We need to be careful not go charging in." "The floor does look kind of weird," Nia said, pointing down. The floor was made up of stone tiles. "They're glyphs," Tio realized. Lumbre's sun, a more sacred heat, and his mother's Quetzal were easy to spot. "It's not all the Dios' glyphs, but definitely all the competitors." "There's my dad's," Nia chirped, pointing excitedly to the glyph with 3 mountains. "I don't recognize this one," Tio said. Among the familiar glyphs, there was a series of tiles with a goat head. It was grinning, its open mouth lined with sharp teeth. "Damn, that's Venganza," Nia said, backing away from the tile. "The god of vengeance," Tio explained, the color draining from his face. "Oh." Tio had only learned about the obsidian gods in school. He clearly wasn't as well versed in the history of the betrayer gods as the golds were. "Yeah, let's not step in those ones," Nia said. "Nothing good will happen." "Maybe we're only supposed to step on the tiles with our parents' glyphs?" Tio guessed, pointing out the path of Quetzal glyphs that led to the pedestal of obsidian stones. "The tiles get smaller the deeper you go into the room," he pointed out. "Probably to make it harder to get the jade and gold stones," Nia guessed. "Could you just use your wings to get the stones?" Zio said, turning to Tio. Tio shook his head, embarrassment warming his cheeks. "The ceiling isn't high enough. I don't think I could get the stones without accidentally bumping into it and dropping onto the tiles," he admitted. Guilt squeezed his stomach as Zio stared at the tiles, his hands white-knuckled as he gripped the straps of his bag. He looked especially smaller and younger than his 13 years. Once again, Tio was hit with the realization of how truly unfair it was that Zio was even in the trials to begin with. "Hey, Tio and I can get the stones," Nia said, lightly bumping her shoulder into Zio's. "You don't have to," Zio started, but Tio cut him off. "Yeah, you stay here and stand guard," he agreed. "I can go for the jades and gold if you can get the obsidians," Nia said, looking at Tio for confirmation. "I don't know. You've got really big feet," Tio teased with a grin. "You sure you can handle the little tiles?" "I might have big feet, but I've got way better balance than you, and your wings flopping around like a baby bird's," Nia shot back. A laugh bucked in Tio's chest. "You've got me there." Zio managed a small smile. "Thanks, you guys." Tio insisted on testing the theory, catching Nia before she jumped into action. She acted as an anchor, gripping Tio's arms in her rock-solid grip as he inched the tiles and experimentally stepped on a Quetzal glyph. The stone remained steady. It swapped spots so Nia could try hers, and when it held true, that was good enough for Tio. Nia headed out first, quickly moving from tile to tile with ease. She went for the gold at the far back of the room first. The way she leapt from one tile to the next without even pausing made Tio's heart clench so tight that he had to stop watching and focus on his own path. Carefully, he stepped from tile to tile, looking 3 steps ahead for his mother's glyph so he didn't get stuck and had to double back. "Got it!" Nia announced, maybe she held the gold stone for them to see before tucking it into her backpack. When she headed back for the jade stones, Tio had only just reached the Quetzal tile closest to the pedestal. He loosened the drawstrings of his pack and carefully dropped in all 10 obsidian stones. The downside to collecting all the obsidians was his bag was quickly filling up and getting heavy to carry. "I got the obsidians!" Tio called out, tugging the bag tightly closed. "Get Get the jades and let's get out of here, he said to Nia. On it, Nia replied, already nearing the last pile of stones. Tio exhaled a huge sigh of relief. The beginning of the trial may have been a disaster, but at least they had it together now. Are you sure you don't? The cracking of stone cut through the air. Tia's head whipped to Nia. She stood perched on a tile, eyes wide. It wasn't me, she said with a jerky shake of her head. Panic squeezed Tio's throat. He turned to find Zio. His foot was on a tile, the stone completely shattered. I slipped! Zio cried out, eyes bulging. Before Tio could react, the ground beneath his feet shuddered. The thunderous sound of stone grinding against stone filled the air. The floor dropped out from under Tio, tilting suddenly like it was on a hinge. His wings shot out, trying to catch him, but it was too late. He fell back, sliding across the stone toward the chasm that had opened up in the floor. Zio scrambled, trying to catch hold of anything, but a small hand slid loosely against the slick stone. Tio! Nia shouted. He could see the terror in her eyes before she fell into the pit. No! The word tore through his throat, but there was nothing he could do. Tio plunged into darkness.